Grace and peace.
Peace be multiplied.
We're going to sing this song. The first time we sing it, I need the whole entire congregation to join in with us. Okay? It's the name of the song is The Lights Turned On. Okay. The lights turned on, you can't hide.
Hey.
The lights turned on.
Come on now.
I was born on February 21st, 1933, in Tyrone, North Carolina. My parent names are Mary Kate Wayman and John Divine Wayman. I studied classical piano at Juilliard, but left early when I ran out of money. I showed an interest to jazz, blues, and folk music. I was a civil activist, a pianist, a singer, and an activist. That's it.
Who is she? Do you know who she is? Anybody know who she is? Anybody know who she is? Just guess. What you think? Say it out loud.
No.
Read it again. It's short. Read it again.
I was born February 21st, 1933. My parents' names are Mary Kate Wayman and John Divine Wayman. I studied classical piano at Juilliard, but I left early because I ran out of money. I had an interest in folk music, jazz, and gospel. I was a civil activist, a pianist, and a singer, and an activist.
Who are you?
I am Nina Simone.
All right. Amen.
Grace and peace.
Grace and peace be multiplied.
My name is Betty Dean Saunders. That's her name. No. It's right. My name is Betty Dean Saunders. I was born on May 28, 1934, and my parents' names are Ollie Mae Saunders and Shelman Sandlin in Pinehurst, Georgia. After attending Pinehurst, Georgia, and after attending high school, I studied at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. I experienced racism to a level that reached deep and encountered the Jim Crow laws that shocked and frustrated me. After moving from Alabama to New York, I studied at Brooklyn State College School of Nursing. Although racism wasn't present, it wasn't as overt, but it still bothered me. During my second year of nursing, I attended a dinner that a friend of mine invited me to at the Nation of Islam Temple in Harlem. I declined to join that night, but on my next visit, I met Malcolm X, the minister to the woman that invited me. I converted in 1956 and married the minister Malcolm X. 2 years later, on January 14, 1958, in Michigan, we had 6 beautiful daughters, but in 1964, Malcolm X announced that we were no longer going to be a part of the Nation of Islam and that we would become Sunni Muslims. We lived a devout Muslim lifestyle. But on February 21st, 1965, a day that would sadden me for years to come, my husband, the great Minister Malcolm X, was assassinated while giving his speech in the Abaddon Ballroom in New York City with my daughters and I in the audience with front row seats. I never remarried, but later died on June 23rd, 1997. Who am I?
Right.
Grace and peace.
Grace and peace be multiplied.
I was born Margaret Annie Johnson on April 4th, 1928 in St. Louis, Missouri, to Vivian Baxter Johnson and Bailey Johnson. My parents divorced when I was 3, and my brother and I went to live with my grandmother in Stamps, Arkansas. When I was 8 years old, I was raped by my mother's boyfriend. When this happened to me, it made me mute, and I went to live back with my grandmother. I made history as the first black cable car conductor when I was 16. In 1958, I developed my skills in poetry and moved to New York where I joined the Harlem Writers Guild. I was an American author, actress, screenwriter, dancer, poet, and civil rights activist. I was best known for my 1969 memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I received 2 NAACP Image Awards for my outstanding literary work. I published several collections of poetry, such as Still I Rise, Phenomenal Woman, and Letter to My Daughter, just to name a few. 2 children I birthed, many friends I've made, Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, James Baldwin, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr. In 2006, I became a radio talk show host, hosted for my good friend Oprah, called Oprah and Friends. In 2008, I became the first recipient for the Hope of Peace and Justice Voice of Peace Award. I died May 28, 2014. Who am I?
Amen. Amen.
Grace and peace.
Grace and peace be multiplied.
Okay. I was born August 26, 1918 in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, to John and Joylette Coleman. I received a BS in mathematics and French at West Virginia State College in 1937. I was handpicked to be one of 3 black students to integrate West Virginia's graduate schools. By 13, I was attending the high school on the current campus of historically black West Virginia State College. At 18, I enrolled in the college itself, where I excelled at the school's math curriculum. I graduated with highest honors in 1937 and took a teaching job at a black public school in Virginia and started a family with my husband. I left and returned to teaching once my 3 daughters were older, but it wasn't until 1952, It wasn't until 1952 when a relative told me about open positions at the all-black West Area Computing Section at the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, Langley Laboratory, which was headed by fellow West Virginian Dorothy Vaughn. My husband, James Goebel, and I decided to move the family to Newport News to pursue the opportunity, and I began work at Langley in the summer of 1953. 2 weeks into my tenure in the office, Dorothy Vaughn assigned me to a project in Maneuver Loads branch of the Flight Research Division, and my temporary position soon became permanent. I spent the next 4 years analyzing data from flight tests and worked on the investigation of a plane crash caused by wake turbulence. However, I was wrapping up my work. My husband died of cancer in December of 1956. But the year 1957 changed my life and history forever. During this year, the launch of the Soviet satellite Sputnik, I worked on math for documents for the notes of space technology. In the year of 1960, You wrote it all wrong? Okay, sorry. I did trajectory analysis for Alan Shepard's May 1961 mission Freedom 7, which was America's first human space flight. In 1962, as NASA prepared for the orbital mission of John Glenn, I was called upon to do the work that I would become most known for. The complexity of the orbital flight required the construction of a worldwide communications network. The computers have been programmed with the orbital equations that will control the trajectory of the capsule of Glenn's Friendship 7 mission. but the astronauts were wary of putting their lives in the care of the electronic calculating machines, which were prone to hiccups and blackouts. As part of the pre-flight checklist, Glenn asked engineers to get the girl, which was me, to run the same numbers through the same equations that had been programmed into the computer, but by hand, on my desktop mechanical calculator machine. If she says they're good, then I'm ready to go, which was Glenn's statement before flight. Glenn's flight was a success and marked a turning point in the competition between the US and the Soviet Union in space. Who am I?
It's a shame. I saw the movie.
Yeah, that's good though, that you know that.
Excellent movie.
Hit it, Fig. Hit it, Fig.
Who are you?
I am Katherine Johnson.
Yes. Amen.
I was born on February 14, 1913 in Tuskegee, Alabama, to Leona and James McCauley. My mother was a teacher and my father was a carpenter. My mother and father separated when I was young, and my brother and I had to move to Montgomery. At the age of 16, I had to leave school with no education to take care of my dying grandmother. 3 years later, I married Raymond Parks. I decided to take a stand on what was right. My husband and I joined the NAACP to end discrimination and segregation. On December 1st, 1955, my whole life changed. Coming from work, tired, I sat on the bus and refused to give up my seat to a white passenger. I was arrested and fined for breaking segregation laws. I died on October 24, 2005 of natural causes.
Hola. I was born Eleanor Fagan on April 7th, 1915 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I spent most of my childhood in Baltimore. My mother, Sadie, had me when she was a teenager, and my father was widely believed to be Clarence Holiday, and he was a successful jazz musician who played with the likes of Fletcher Henderson. Unfortunately, as a child, my father was not really there, and my mother married Philip Grohl in the 1920s, and a few years later, I had somewhat of a stable household, but that marriage ended a few years later, leaving me and my mother to struggle on our own. And sometimes I was left in the care of other people. With that, I started to skip school, and my mother had to go to the courts for my truancy. And in the midst of that, I was sent to the House of the Good Shepherd, a faculty for troubled African American girls, in February of 1925. Only at the age of 9 years old, I was the youngest girl. And when I returned to my mother's care, it was reported that I was sexually assaulted in 1926. Due to that, me and my mom, we moved to Harlem, we moved to New York in the 1920s, and I ended up working in the house of prostitution in Harlem for a time. Around the 1930s, I began singing in local clubs, and I changed my name. At the age of 19, I was discovered by John Hadman, and I was performing in jazz clubs. Who am I?
Billie Holiday.
Grace and peace be multiplied.
I was born November 11th, 1914. My mother was murdered when I was an infant by 3 white men. Out of fear, my father soon after fled the town, leaving me behind with some friends. Growing up as a black woman, I refused to accept my assigned place in society. In 1957, I became a household name as I fought for the rights of 9 black students to attend the all-white Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. We were known as Little Rock 9. I married my husband March 4th, 1942, and we later established the Arkansas State's Press, a weekly statewide newspaper which advocated civil rights for black Arkansas residents. The Arkansas State Press was known for its famous reporting of acts of police brutality against black soldiers from a nearby Army camp. As a public and highly vocal supporter of many programs, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People elected me in 1952 to serve as president of the State's Conference of Arkansas's branch. After the Supreme Court deemed segregation unconstitutional in 1954, I led the NAACP's protest against the Little Rock School Board plans for slow integration of the public school and demand immediate integration. I personally began taking black students to the white school for an entire school year, accompanied by newspapers and photographers who recorded each instant when the child was refused admission. This intense pressure induced the school board to announce its plans to commence desegregation at Central High School in September 1957. The 9 black students and I were chosen to enroll in the high school withstood attempts at intimidation by the white oppression in Little Rock, which include rallies, legal actions, threats, and acts of violence. Several attempts were made and failed, and the black students were not allowed to enter the school despite the court's order. Finally, on September 25th, orders from the president set all Arkansas National Guard units and thousands of paratroopers to enforce the law at the school. The students and I were escorted safely into the school, and I continue to be an advocate for the students throughout their time at the school. Because of my continuous support in advertising boycotting, we endured personal harassment, and for our actions, we were led in 1952 to close the Arkansas State's Press. In 1962, I published my autobiography and accounts of the Little Rock 9. In 1964, my husband and I moved to Washington, D.C., and I worked for a Democratic National Committee. I was forced to stop working in 1965 when I suffered a stroke. We then returned home to Little Rock, Arkansas shortly before moving to Mitchfield, Arkansas. My husband died in 1960. After the death of my husband, I returned to Little Rock and revived the Arkansas State's Press. In 1964, I was awarded an honorary Doctor of Law degree from the University of Arkansas and named an honorary member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. The University Press republished my memoir in 1986, and it became the first reprint edition to receive an American Book Award. In 1986, I also sold the press and continued to act as a consultant for several years. In 1999, I carried the torch of the Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia. I died of a heart attack in Little Rock on November 4th, 1999. I was the first African American to rest in state in Arkansas State's Capitol building. Who am I? I am Daisy Bates.
Peace be multiplied.
I was born April 27, 1927, and I died January 30th, 2006. I was an American author, activist, civil rights leader, and the wife of a pastor. I helped lead the civil rights movement in the 1960s. I was an active advocate for African American equality. Who am I?
Is that Giovanni?
Coretta Scott King?
Yes.